Good morning to all of you. Again, thank you. It's a real privilege for me to be here. This topic is topical, to use that word, every year. But first, I think I'd like to compliment all of you for being here today, because what it says to me is that you are interested and you are globally minded, and through this forum, you wish to connect with other like-minded people and be exposed to new thinking and share new ideas. And this forum has proven itself year in and year out to be an excellent and favorite platform to do just that. If you weren't convinced of the global nature of our world today, the spread of COVID-19 unfortunately brings that point home. We are all in this together, as they say, and so we come together today. And so you are here at the forum today, and all I can say is well done. Good decision. The Global Forum spreads thinking and ideas globally and through you, and it brings interested minds together, whether directly in person or, in this case this year, via Zoom. I find it personally interesting and very telling that we gather each year at this conference, as I said, for the topic of discussing infrastructure. And the reason is simple, that infrastructure is incredibly important to our economy and crosses over every sector of business and every area of daily life. We speak of infrastructure in the context of city building and the importance of investing in physical roads and digital connection points. And we speak of infrastructure in the context of climate change and the importance of building green and resilient buildings that can support the national and global sustainability objectives. And in the last several months, we've been speaking of infrastructure in the context of recovery and the opportunity to make investments in infrastructure that can support a restart of the economy during and following this pandemic, but also in the context of social and economic inequity. The benefits of infrastructure are frankly not enjoyed equally by all. Investment in infrastructure is critical to a strong and competitive economy, and investment in infrastructure improves our social and environmental quality of life. In fact, every dollar spent on infrastructure increases the GDP by as much as $1.20. So it's no surprise that an important part of Canada's recovery strategy is the introduction of the Canada Infrastructure Bank and the commitment to invest $35 billion in new, green, revenue-generating infrastructure projects that are in the public interest. On a personal note, frankly, I love this topic. That's why I suppose my good friend Nick Remillard keeps trotting me out every year to open this session. But I do. I love the topic of infrastructure. I've spent my career there in shipping and aviation and infrastructure investment. So forgive me the small infomercial that's about to follow that will tell you a little bit about the business organization that I lead. So infrastructure is at the heart of what we do at PortsToronto, whether it's transportation infrastructure as it relates to Billy Bishop Toronto City Airport, or commercial and trade infrastructure as it relates to our involvement in marine and port operations, or municipal infrastructure as it relates to access and connectivity. PortsToronto recognizes the strategic and civil importance of infrastructure development and the role of this investment in making a good city great. So if we're going to preserve and build better cities, we have to focus on innovation, and that includes sustainable development and community investment. And many of the projects that PortsToronto undertakes for the City of Toronto are looked at through multiple lenses that include transportation connectivity, environmental sustainability, and of course, community engagement. Of interest, we are currently converting the Billy Bishop Airport ferry vessel to all-electric power. This innovative project will be delivered next June or July, and it will have the ferry powered by an electric lithium-ion source that will be the first of its kind in Canada and only the second electric ferry of its kind in North America. There are also city building projects such as the Landside Modernization Project that was completed near the airport this past month, and that has reconfigured the road connections to the airport to create a better flow for passengers, and has created community benefits such as more green space and better access for the neighboring Toronto District School Board. Projects such as these and organizations such as PortsToronto ideally share vision and collaborate to play an important role in city building as we drive the economy by providing hubs of commerce, gateways to trade and places of employment, as well as creating and maintaining municipal infrastructure from airports and ports to tunnels and bridges. This was once the sole domain of the cities and provinces, but as the need for infrastructure investment grows and the means of public financing are stretched, increasingly thin, it is important to develop partnerships to ensure that infrastructure keeps pace and that cities can grow and improve. So thank you for listening to that. It's now my great pleasure to introduce the moderator for today's session, Mr. Gregory Smith. Greg Smith is President and Chief Executive Officer of InstarAGF and is a pioneer and authority in the infrastructure investment community, bringing more than 25 years of experience in the investment, operation, acquisition, and financing of public and private infrastructure, real estate, power, and utility businesses. Prior to founding Instar Group of companies, Mr. Smith served as the managing partner and head of Brookfield Financial's Global Infrastructure Advisory Group, president of Macquarie Capital Funds of Canada Limited, managing director and co-head of RBC Capital Partners, mezzanine fund, and managing director at Deloitte and Touche Corporate Finance. And importantly, he was the lead visionary and investor in the purchase of the passenger terminal at our Billy Bishop Toronto City Airport. I have gotten to know him. I like him, I respect his ability, and he's a great choice to moderate the next session. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Greg Smith.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff, for that very kind introduction this morning. It's great to see you in this virtual format before us. I'd also like to thank you for the great work that PortsToronto is doing on the marina and the airport, especially during this very difficult time in COVID. It is really a gateway across Canada and a gateway between our two great nations for the movement of goods and people and passengers. And we look forward to the resumption of travel in a more resilient way as we make our way through the recovery of COVID. So thank you very much for that introduction. And good morning, everyone. And thank you to the Toronto Global Forum for making this very important dialogue possible today. Now, I'm delighted to be here this morning with our panelists to discuss how to improve and future-proof infrastructure that will foster growth, opportunity, and equality for our communities, not only today, but for generations to come. Infrastructure has really been a story around evolution, around emerging needs. Now, the traditional lines of infrastructure are starting to blur and starting to change. The traditional lines between energy infrastructure and transportation infrastructure. And it's shifting because of what's happening with demographic shifts, what's happening with technology shifts, what's happening with urbanization. And it really provides an opportunity for innovation. A crisis provides tremendous opportunity for innovation on the economic as well as on the social side of things. And that's what we're going to explore today. Jeff sort of mentioned the importance of infrastructure investing. If I look ahead to 2050, 75% of infrastructure that we need in 2050 does not exist today. That means we're going to be essentially rebuilding our infrastructure over the next few decades. A tremendous opportunity as well as a challenge. Now, the pandemic clearly shows the consequences of slow action, biodiversity, climate change, human capital, slow action on social and economic change. And this is where the opportunity comes in. We do have a unique opportunity to build back better. A dollar invested in infrastructure does have a 1.7 times multiplier effect on the economy, but more importantly, infrastructure actually reduces inequality and helps improve the quality of life. A tremendous opportunity before us. And today we're going to talk about the solutions as well as the challenges and explore how do we collaborate and how do we capitalize on these opportunities before us to improve, to adapt, and to modernize our infrastructure for the next generation. We'll look at sustainability imperatives and how we can harness technology and data to help our communities and our economies thrive. Now, I'm going to start with an introduction of our panelists, and I'm going to ask them to say a little bit more about themselves and their corporation and how they are thinking about the challenges of infrastructure in the design, the delivery, and the financing of infrastructure assets. Now, Carrie is the president and chief operating officer of Parsons Corporation, which is a disruptive technology provider for global defense, intelligence, and critical infrastructure markets. Florence is the chairwoman and chief executive officer of RATP Development, which is part of the RATP Group, a public transportation operator in cities on 4 continents. A great profile and lots of experience and vision to give us. Graham is the President and Chief Operating Officer of ARM Holdings, a global powerhouse in the semiconductor industry. 70% of the global population uses technology based on ARM's process designs today in devices from sensors to smartphones to smart computers or to supercomputers. And Tox is the director of the California Department of Transportation, also known as Caltrans. He manages a $15 billion budget related to state highways, bridges, and interrail services and transit support to more than 200 local and regional transportation industries. Welcome to all of you. Now, Carrie, I'm going to start with you. In our current environment, where are you seeing the opportunities for technology to contribute to the safety and confidence of our citizens and users of infrastructure?
Thank you, Greg, and thank you for having us participate in the Toronto Global Forum, and I'm pleased to be on such a distinguished panel today. As you indicated in your opening remarks, change equals opportunity. So I'd like to highlight 5 areas where we see opportunity. The first is in cybersecurity. The cyber threats are increasing, and the level of sophistication is also continuing to evolve. This is becoming as increased technology applied to infrastructure. The second area is global infrastructure needs to have significant replacements and upgrades, as well as technology-driven infrastructure. So if you look at the infrastructure of today, particularly aviation, rail, transit, bridges, much of it was designed for a 30-year service life, so it's very vulnerable. As we look forward, Parsons is designing for a 100-year service life as we design and build future programs. In addition, we're putting together smart infrastructure. A great example of this is putting a sensor onto a bridge so that you can tell if the bridge is stable, and you can also perform predictive maintenance. A third area that I'd like to highlight is smart cities. As we have increased urbanization, there's increased demand for smart cities. How do we connect our security cameras to our streetlights, to our emergency services, to be able to improve public services as well as all of our citizens' access and availability? The fourth area where Parsons sees opportunity is in climate change. With respect to climate change, we need to be very predictive about what might occur and then quickly respond as things do occur. And a great example of this is the recent wildfires that we had in both Colorado and California. Parsons has developed a product called Grid Armor, which applies artificial intelligence to determine if and when a fire might occur and how to most rapidly respond if a fire does occur. And then finally, there are a lot of COVID-related opportunities. The world as we knew it before is going to be different tomorrow. As you look at travel, as you look at going to sporting events, entertainment events, there's opportunities in health screening and integrated testing and screening capabilities.
Thanks, Carrie. You've made a lot of interesting points. We're going to follow up a bit more on this cybersecurity, on the technology part. What really resonates with me is building for 100 years versus the traditional or historical build of 30 years. And how do we get more use out of our infrastructure, multi-purpose use out of our infrastructure? So there's lots of things that I think we'll follow up as we get into the panel discussions there. So thank you for that. We're going to move on to Lawrence. It's really interesting on how RATP thinks about resilience and multi-use infrastructure on that vein. How can we get more out of our infrastructure, and how are you innovating in that area?
Yeah. Good morning, Greg, and again, it's a pleasure to participate to this event. And from Paris, I would have preferred to be in Toronto, but it is from Paris this year. Your question is very much critical for RATP Dev, as we inherit transport infrastructure that were built either years ago, even a century ago, or infrastructure that are completely greenfield infrastructure. And our responsibility as a pure player is to operate and maintain this infrastructure, modernize them under a concession contract that can last from 5 years for the shortest to up to 30 or 35 years for the longest. So as such, we are operator in Paris. For instance, the Line 1 of Metro was built 120 years ago. We are operator in Manila for the Metro, built 30 years ago. We are operator of the historical Hong Kong tramway that was built at the beginning of the 20th century. But we are also the operator of the Riyadh or Doha Metro, which are completely brand new world-class driverless metro infrastructure, or same in Cairo for the new Line 3. So basically, in our 13 different countries where we operate with our 20,000 people, we are facing the same challenge of resilience and adaptation to time. The first thing I want to stress is that by nature, by design, infrastructure must be resilient. We have faced, and we are still facing actually, very stressful condition for infrastructure these days with the sanitary crisis. And in the mass transit transportation, the resistance to this crisis has been more than amazing. And it is very true to say that this resistance is much more linked to the engagement of our people on a day-to-day basis to adapt the existing way of operating the infrastructure to the new sanitary condition than to anything else. The adaptation, the agility is absolutely critical to ensure that the transportation infrastructure will continue to attract people and transport people on a daily basis, on a long-term basis, and therefore will continue for the business model of the public transportation to be sustainable, which is also a very critical question. Today, all protocol in relation with safety, with cleaning, with passenger behavior, wearing masks, etc., have been fully redesigned to ensure safe transportation to our clients and reassure them. We have provided to our clients ticketing, contactless ticketing system where it did not exist, passenger app to monitor the real-time bus occupancy, which is a crucial information today for our passenger, for their comfort and their peace of mind. And we can talk about the crisis, but not only about the crisis. Resilience of transportation infrastructure, as you mentioned, is linked to innovation, is linked to modernization, and this is one of the challenges that Carey just mentioned, and is linked to multi-use of infrastructure. And all this cannot be foreseen or envisioned upfront at the beginning because an infrastructure is built for decades. And this is where, again, I am a very strong believer of the critical role of the operator of this infrastructure that must ensure resilience, multi-usage, innovation. And I will illustrate this with some very concrete example. Again, in Paris, we are the operator of the Metro, Line 120 years ago. We have upgraded and converted this historical line on an historical infrastructure to a full driverless metro line, and this is a very high capacity line without traffic interruption. And this worldwide success was born in the head of our manager during the mid-20s, and it was to face the increasing ridership increase, the increasing ridership challenge for a very old infrastructure. London Bus Depot. We are one of the largest bus operators in London. London, as many other cities, is facing this challenge of reducing dramatically the CO2 emission. We have upgraded our historical depots to run electrical buses and face this climate change. Multi-use and financing challenges. That's also a very, very interesting challenge for infrastructure to enable them to be resilient. And I will illustrate that with the last two examples. One, not coming from RATP, but coming from one of our partners, Getlink. Getlink is the Eurotunnel, this infrastructure linking France to Great Britain. So this is a tunnel under the sea, a 30-year-old tunnel. And today, there is a major project currently run by Getlink to use the existing tunnel infrastructure to build an electrical interconnection, strengthening and securing cross-panel electricity exchanges. And this project was, of course, not foreseen initially and represent a brand new use case for this infrastructure. Last illustration, again, back to Paris with the depot electrification. We have converted a very old-fashioned diesel depot with a heavy footprint in the center of Paris to a brand new depot with all the buses that are underground, and we have rebuilt new urban development above it. We're offering office spaces, housing, commercial, and green space. So these are illustrations that demonstrate that the agility, the capacity to adapt to new challenges of an organization that operates an existing infrastructure is at paramount of resilience for infrastructure.
It's amazing as we talk around infrastructure, what's really captured me in some of your comments too is the rate of change. If we think about the technology adoption that we've asked people to go through over the past 6 months, it's been quite dramatic, both as individuals and as organizations, as well as for infrastructure, the technology adoption. But then when I actually think also around the ESG factors, and you started to talk about the community and how we're engaging with nature and how we're engaging with society, the adoption rate and the change that we're seeing around ESG adoption and measures to support not only the environment, but the engagement with society and stakeholders, as well as the governance around infrastructure, and realizing it's more than just the technical and financial merit. It has to be successful in the eyes of the community and what they're adopting. We're asking people to change an awful lot. And when I was sort of made probably a mistake at the beginning of the conference with mentioning to Jeff, I wish when things get back to normal, I think we're going to a new normal. What does that new normal look like? And Talks, as I move over to you, I'm thinking about the resiliency of our communities as a really important piece. The location and nature of transportation services has a relationship to social advantaged and disadvantaged and their accessibility to jobs. But how do we bring issues of social equity directly into the use and transportation planning process that you're engaged in?
Thanks, Greg, and thank you for having California be a part of the conversation this morning. I think the premise of your question, first of all, is a very important one, and one that we've ignored for many years. And I'm glad the question is in the lines of thinking about not just transportation by itself, but transportation and land use. In 1961, President Kennedy said in an address to Congress, he said, look, transportation and land use must go hand in hand as two inseparable aspects of the same process. And so he essentially said, look, these things are joined together. We can't do one, we can't plan one or construct or build one without the other. And I think the other part to your question is the social equity part. When you look at the history of how we have built the transportation infrastructure specifically in this country, when you look at the history of it, the biggest part of the infrastructure we've built has been the interstate and highway system, called the biggest public works project in history, in the history of the world, some would argue, but definitely in the United States. But that history is marred in some places with outcomes that haven't been so good from an equity standpoint for many. That system was built, in many cases, gutting through and dividing through thriving minority communities across the country. And so when we look forward and think about what you said earlier, Greg, when you think about how we build the infrastructure for the next 50 or 100 years, we have to do it through an equity lens. We can't just make the mistakes that we've made in the past. We can't go back and make those same mistakes again, because when we built that infrastructure, of course it meant economic growth, it meant commerce, it meant new development for this nation, for many parts of the world, but it also meant that many communities were divided, and that they were dilapidated by some of those decisions. So an equity lens in the work that we do moving forward is important. In California, at Caltrans specifically, we're using that approach. We're not going to be building big, giant new freeways, I believe. I think those days are largely behind us. We're going to be focused, I think Kerry mentioned this, we're going to be focused on how technology can really optimize the infrastructure we have today and improve and maintain the system that is existing today. A lot of what we're going to invest moving forward is really going to be centered around things that have a sort of win-win benefit, not only for mobility, but also for climate, for the climate challenges that we have moving forward. And there's no doubt from our perspective in California, we're the largest state department of transportation in the country. There's no doubt from our end that we're going to be absolutely doing that work through an equity lens and making sure that whether it be economic equity, whether it be racial equity or any forms of key diversity points that we need to look at, we will be factoring those into our decision making as we build infrastructure in the state moving forward.
Thank you, Tox. I think that's one of the great things around infrastructure is, we as an organization have a purpose statement, which is improving people's lives. And it really is around the whole picture of improving people's lives and the communities in which we operate in. And I think what you have there is very important. Diversity and inclusion isn't good enough just to support it. You have to be proactive and do something about it. It takes active action to do something about it. And I like your comments around reuse and rehabilitate as well. How do we get more out of our existing assets versus just building new all the time? And that's going to be a really important topic. And I like the way you're thinking in that regard. I want to come back into a little more in technology. And Graham, I'm going to bring it over to you now, because your business is really focused on evolving innovation and helping companies take advantage of 5G and smart cities and the Internet of Things and autonomous vehicles. How will 5G support and improve physical infrastructure as you introduce yourself? I'm very curious on your vantage point there.
Yeah, well, first of all, like everybody else, it's great to be here and great to be able to join. I wish I could also be there in person, but I'm with you from across the other side of the Atlantic in the UK. So I think it's a fantastic question, and the perspective that we come at this at is a little bit different, I guess, probably from the other panelists, because we're not directly so involved in infrastructure. Our technology is kind of foundational to all of this, really. So it's foundational microprocessor technology, which is at the heart of computing everywhere. So everything from your mobile phone to the network infrastructure, the cloud, through to the tiniest of IoT devices. We don't actually manufacture anything. We create these designs, we create this intellectual property to enable other companies to create these complex chip designs that sit at the heart of all this digital electronics. And our business model is based on and we've got this amazing ecosystem of thousands of partners that we work with. And the business is really built around collaboration with those partners who are using our technology, whether it's to create infrastructure solutions or mobile solutions or autonomous vehicle solutions or whatever it is, to accelerate innovation and be able to really solve complex technology problems together. That's kind of what we do. But sitting at that pretty foundational level in the supply chain gives us a lot of insight into technology trends and what's going on. And you mentioned 5G. I mean, 5G is going to revolutionize infrastructure. A lot of people are thinking about 5G as, it's just some other mobile standards, so it just means faster data rates for our mobile phones. But it's going to be, the impact of 5G is going to be so much broader than that, and enable a whole new kind of a whole new set of applications around smart infrastructure. Actually, we like to talk about 5G not on its own. I mean, clearly the connectivity piece is incredibly important, but we like to think of it in terms of the combination of 5G, the Internet of Things, and artificial intelligence together. Because really it's the combination of those three kind of emerging technologies that are going to revolutionize how we use data and the kind of services and applications that are going to be built on top of that. So the IoT is going to enable us to gather data more effectively from so many different sources. AI is going to process that data more intelligently. And 5G is going to enable, is going to distribute it faster and enable better connectivity with higher capacity. But it's really when you put all of those together, you get the really interesting opportunities for new applications, new types of services, new types of capability, new ways of using data to enhance people's lives, and to enhance the resilience of the infrastructure that we have. So I think with 5G as well, we talked about faster data speeds. That's the kind of obvious thing that most people latch onto. But 5G technology will also greatly reduce latency, so data latency, the response time down to around a millisecond. And that means, real-time response for applications, for like immersive experience, critically important for autonomous vehicles, linking to infrastructure, industrial IoT applications, remote medical applications, remote robotics. There's so many different applications which will be enabled by the reduced latency. And the third trend I wanted to pick out, where I think 5G is going to be different, which is going to create new opportunities in its use and its rollout in infrastructure, is that 5G infrastructure is being built in a more open and scalable way compared to what we've had in the past. So using open standards and open systems, there are many initiatives around open radio access networks, and these open standards are going to enable more innovation and more agile service rollouts within the entire ecosystem. And it's a very complex ecosystem of equipment vendors, operators, and end users. And that's really, really important given the diversity of applications that we're expecting to see 5G used for and integrated into. We're working with more than 100 open source initiatives, open source software initiatives at the moment, operating systems, cloud native technologies, end-to-end security, networking stacks, everything that's going to be needed to enable 5G to be successful. So to wrap this bit up, the 5G networks of the future are going to be able to connect anything, anywhere, with improved data performance, improved efficiency, and lower cost. But, as I mentioned a minute ago, I think the really key thing is we shouldn't just think about 5G on its own, just think about connectivity. While that is very important, we should think about the impact that it's going to have together with the other transformational technologies of AI and the IoT. It's about connecting everything everywhere, and that will just create that creates an opportunity for impact on social infrastructure and to improve all of our lives.
I like the way you said that, which is 5G is really a connectivity infrastructure. It's an enabler of all these things that are possible. It's almost like if I'm sitting in your chair, it must feel like you're drinking from a fire hose in terms of all the different applications and possibilities across the different sectors and subsectors that kind of exist. How do you pick and choose what you need to work on, or what is the evolution, and how do we actually deal with the human impact? I'm still trying to figure out how to come on to some of these video platforms and stop myself from speaking when I'm on mute. And all this different possibility around technology exists at the same time. Let's dive a little bit into one of the topics. And I think I'm going to come back to you to start with, but I want to dive in a little bit more into resiliency. And what I'm looking at from my vantage point is we used to have all these kind of what we refer to as low probability or remote probability, but high impact events. Climate change. If we were here a couple of years ago, we would have been talking about hurricanes and floods and weather patterns and future-proofing assets because of climate change. Now we're here talking about pandemic. We also talk about technology disruptions. As an infrastructure investor, we used to do broadband towers, which aren't really what we're talking about anymore. We're talking about smart cities and IoT and different aspects of digital infrastructure and connectivity infrastructure. The resiliency around technology and climate change and pandemic is a massive. How is this goal of resiliency changing the way we think about infrastructure development? And how has the pandemic changed your view on what future infrastructure needs are for your organization?
Well, thanks for that question, Greg. Look, let me start with the pandemic itself, and how it's impacting how we think about our work. Graham talked, pretty extensively and well about 5G and the importance of it to the future that we're thinking about. From an infrastructure standpoint. And I'll tell you from my end, we have roughly 15,000 people that work for our department that are eligible to work remotely. At the beginning of March of this year, we had probably 200 people teleworking out of that 15,000 that were eligible. Within a span of 2 weeks after the pandemic hit, and we were the first state to put a shelter-in-place order in. Our Governor Newsom, was the first governor. We immediately had to go to almost 13,000 people within a span of 2 weeks. 13,000 members of our staff had to go into remote working conditions, and so that not only meant us, that it also meant our schools, that also meant many other workplaces. So the importance of broadband is being highlighted more than ever, as far as its importance in the work that we're all doing. And you think broadband, you think, why does a transportation entity? Why would you need to be involved in that? Well, the infrastructure that you need to install, in many cases, can fit very perfectly within the right of way that we own, the right of way that the transportation department oversees. So as we're building the transportation infrastructure, we could help support the development of broadband. And so we're right smack sort of down in the middle of the technology discussions and growth as well. And I think we play a very important and critical role in that. And shifting to the resiliency discussion a little bit, look, this is at the top of our agenda. In California, the governor recently made global news. The governor recently announced an executive order here in the state and said in 15 years, now the clock is ticking, it's really 14 years. In 14 years, there will be no more sales of combustion engine vehicles in the state. Yeah. That we're going to completely transition to zero emission vehicles. That's a very tight timeline, but very doable. And the reason why is because it's the obvious reason is that combustion engine or fuel-based vehicles emit more and continue to cause the challenges that we see with climate change. When you think about it, for our state in California, 40% of the GHG in the state of California comes from the transportation sector. So it's a dominant part of the climate and emissions issues that we're facing. So if we're going to tackle the climate challenges we face, it has to start with transportation. That's where it starts nationally across the country in America. That number is close to 30%. So in California, the GHG emissions at 40%. It's actually higher. And the way we're going to go about doing this, not only with what the governor is asking us to do to shift from the fuel-based vehicles to zero-emission vehicles. But the infrastructure that we oversee, so we need to support that goal. So we need to put in place the charging stations, for example, that are going to help support a lot of that electric infrastructure. But not only that, we need to think about the challenges that we are facing and start to plan for them more head on. We have 12 different districts, if you will, at the California Department of Transportation. 12 different areas, and all 12 of those districts, all 12 of those sort of planning areas have developed a vulnerability study to assess what kind of impacts the climate challenges that we're seeing are going to have on those 12 different districts, because they're very unique. California is like a country unto its own. And so we need to think about all those districts and think about the impacts that climate change is going to have. So we've identified things like 200 miles of roadway that are going to be facing challenges of sea level rise of more than 5 feet. So we know where those 200 miles of roadway are. We know there are 7,000 miles of highways, 7,000 that are vulnerable to fires. And, we've seen the fire challenge this year hit us harder than it's ever hit. This is the worst that the fires have ever been in the state, in the history of the state. We've burned over 4 million acres of land. Nearly 4% of the state of California has burned due to the climate challenges we face. And the infrastructure we build and how we build it is very much in the center of us being prepared for the climate challenges that we face moving forward.
Thanks, Doc. It's not lost on me that you are right at that interface when we talked about breaking down barriers between traditional subsectors. When I think about transportation infrastructure and technology and digital infrastructure and energy transition and what's moving through it, but at the same time dealing with the very fundamental matters of ESG, how are we dealing with the climate change and the disruption there and improving the environment, at the same time engaging with our communities. And during a time of pandemic, you're right at the center of the interface, implementing what we're talking about here. And so that perspective is very much appreciated. Now, Carrie, I want to ask you to jump in here. Let's continue on the theme of resilience, but let's talk a bit more about the technology as well, and how technology in the planning and the designing and the construction, as well as technologies as you're interfacing with communities. And I do believe that there's more that we can be doing to interface with communities to get them involved earlier in the design and planning of critical infrastructure, so that when it is fundamentally built, it's not about the technical or economic success of a project. It's about the community support and adoption of that infrastructure. And so let's talk a little bit on your view, how you see resiliency. As you mentioned earlier, you think about 100 years. Resiliency in technology and infrastructure and planning and design.
Sure. Well, first, we see a migration of the physical and the digital worlds, and that's very important as we look forward to designing it, something that has to be built in from the front. As you look at resiliency in the past, it was often an afterthought. So it was, how do we add resiliency into our systems after they've been built? And that's actually not a good way to go about it, because resiliency really needs to be built in from the start. I would also like to hit on cybersecurity and the criticality of that. Really, an enterprise-wide risk-based cybersecurity assessment needs to be done, because you can't protect everything everywhere. And if you look, there's been 17 critical infrastructure sectors that have been identified. Many of those are under cyber attacks. And so it's really trying to figure out where are the highest risk that could potentially hurt the operations, and making sure that those are protected, and also making sure that there's redundancy or approach. I'd also go back to some of the areas that Graham hit upon. I think, the Internet of Things and the connectivity provides tremendous access. Everything is going to be connected going forward. Another area I would highlight is intelligent transportation systems and how those are going to evolve to improve information management, traffic management, and traffic flow. And then finally, if you look at digital twins, we're eventually going to have 2D, 3D models, and then even real life models that interconnect with everything that we're designing and building. So I think technology is going to be a key part of the future, and making sure that it's at the forefront. And as we're designing anything that has to do with infrastructure, we keep technology in mind and that convergence of the physical and digital worlds and how we best take advantage of that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kerry. It is very interesting. Please, Graham, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one comment to what Kerry was saying there. Just picking up on the sort of cybersecurity theme and the security theme here, because absolutely in the context of our broader sort of resilience theme here, I think security and safety, as we move to this world where everything is connected, everything is digital, everything contains digital technology, these points are going to be absolutely critical to ensure that everything is designed, from the get-go with security in mind. I think today, we're still in a place where there's not enough attention being focused on design, basic fundamentals, design for security. Security, of course, directly links into safety, because if it is possible for any kind of IoT system to be hacked, especially any kind of system that's involved in, transportation, for example, or in robotics, or smart city infrastructure, all of these amazing applications that we're expecting to see that are going to enhance the quality of all of our lives, they are potentially vulnerable to cybersecurity issues, which can then directly lead into safety issues. So it is just so important that as a broader industry, we are all thinking about designing in security from the ground up. We obviously are involved in designing the hardware at the very kind of lowest level, really, of the microprocessor. So it starts there, the sort of root of trust in the microprocessor itself, but then all the layers of software that are built on top of that by so many different companies across the ecosystem. It's something that we have to address collaboratively as an industry to get this right, and it is just going to be so important to ensure resiliency of these amazing new systems and applications and infrastructure that we will be able to create.
Well, thank you, Graham. I think that's a really important part. It's very interesting that 5G and technology has such a geopolitical impact on what we're talking about when we sort of talk about cybersecurity and we talk about the rollout of technology and what's actually happening through it. It's interesting to see that confluence of events and the importance of infrastructure in terms of the impact that it does have on a region and a community, but we have to manage the cybersecurity and the influence that technology has on people's lives, on businesses as well. And maybe, Laurence, let's take that trend around. When I think about geopolitical, I start to think about populism a little bit. I start to think about I do believe populism is not just about politics. I do think populism is around communities, and looking at infrastructure is not just transitory through a community, but what it's doing to improve a community. When I think about ESG, I often think about it more like GSE, the other way. If we get our governance right and we get our society and stakeholder impacts right and we deal with the communities properly, good decisions will be made about the environment and some of the other impacts. So we take the very sensitive topic around ESG and what we're doing to improve communities, what we're doing to improve the environment. Maybe just talk a little bit more around what you're seeing in that sphere.
Okay, so and it will be very linked to what has been mentioned by Carey and by talks around the climate challenge, and this is the S basically. The cost of pollution is astronomical, and talks mention it for the Californian state, but recent studies show that, for instance, for London, the cost of pollution is 11 billion euro a year. For Paris, it's 1,600 euro per inhabitant per year, and this is the cost of death, of social, medical care, insurance, etc., etc. And in France, and this has to be, we can think about it in this pandemic crisis. In France, roughly between 50,000 and 80,000 people die every year because of pollution. So therefore, for us, encouraging people out of cars and relentlessly reducing the carbon footprint of existing and future public transportation is absolutely a key priority for the world, basically. And because transportation accounts for roughly on a worldwide basis, so it's 40% for California, on a worldwide basis, it's 25% of all global emission. So I think as a stakeholder of infrastructure and as a major ESG responsibility, we should all tackle this issue and set up for our own organization very ambitious goal in terms of reducing dramatically this emission. And as far as RATP is concerned, between 15 and 25, this is 50% reduction of emission that we have set up as an ambition. And also climate change and public transportation, that is very linked in terms of sustainability of public transportation infrastructure, which is also linked to resilience. What we can see with this pandemic is that basically today, depending on the region of the world where we are, but the ridership is roughly between 50% and 60% to what has been before. And we need absolutely to give reassurance to our passengers for them to be back in the public transportation, to avoid using more the car, because car is absolutely a disaster for this climate change challenge. And for that, all the operator and all the public transit authority and the government have a critical role to play to set up very clear rules as far as how to use public transportation, wearing masks, etc., etc. As far as communicating on fact, and the facts are very, very clear. Today, the risk of being contaminated in public transportation is very low because in most of the city, people are wearing masks because in public transportation, even though we are surrounded by people, we don't talk to each other. So it's a mask plus no talk. There's a sort of social distancing because this is only 60%, 50% of ridership. And the time you spend in public transportation is quite short. So public transportation is safe, and it might be also the good time with this new normality that you mentioned, Greg, to think about congestion charges and new projects around this congestion crisis. That may be a very good way of tackling both the climate change and the sustainability of transportation infrastructure.
Thank you for those comments. I think it's just absolutely critical. We see the importance of infrastructure. We see what's happening with all the, ability to future-proof our assets using technology in a very proactive way. But fundamentally, infrastructure is about people. And how do we engage with people? And how do we facilitate people? And I really love the phrase, improving people's lives. I wish we had another hour to continue this discussion. We are just scraping the top of the surface on all of these topics. But thank you very much for taking time out of your day to join me for this great discussion. Thank you to each of you. And I'll turn it back to Jill.